Hello there and welcome to Laurence Plays Factorio, and boy have I got a treat for you today. This is the Omnicrafter, well it's not an Omnicrafter, but it's a many things crafter that I have affectionately dubbed the Abomination, because over the time I've been designing it, it's been a bit weird and a bit horrible. So today I'm going to show you how it works. I decided I wanted to build it when the 2.0 announcement came out saying that you're now able to set recipes on assembly machines. So of course the obvious thing to do with that is to set up a system that can build absolutely everything. Now this can in theory do that, but it does break sometimes. And so I decided that, well, because I didn't really want to use bots because I have a personal vendetta against the things, as you're probably aware if you've been watching this channel for very long. And also you need to be able to insert lots and lots of different things into your assembly machines. I decided the logical way to do it would be to feed a variety of different things into a train wagon like this, and then have inserters passing in and out of assembly machines around it. So down here we've got a system where we feed in all the different these things I'm going to call basic ingredients. They're not just raw resources like iron and copper and so on. We've also got the various circuits coming in here and so on. But these are all things that, at least when I'm playing, will tend to be on the bus and therefore are easily available and can be brought in. And then I'm reading the contents of the train out through the station up here and passing that down here. And then it's as simple as looking at how much is in the wagon, and then if it's less than a certain amount, then we pass a bit more in. So it's not an enormously accurate control on how much of each of these resources ends up in there, but it's close enough. And if the wagon was a lot bigger, had a much higher capacity, then it would work quite a lot more nicely, but it isn't, so, you know, we'll just have to deal with it about that. But that's okay. So we're bringing in resources down here and then making them into things. Up here we've got a shopping list. These are the things that we're trying to make, and the game works through, and all of these signals are passed over to the assembly machines, and then they use a cunning optimization system which is known as finding the one that appears first in these lists as you go through them to decide which one to make first. So at the moment, as you can see, it's working on spaceship parts because they're quite a long way on. They're on the fourth tab over here, so it's working through the spaceship parts. So once it's made some engines, it'll then probably move on to combat stuff and make some turrets and things like that. And then as you can see, it's all getting collected down here because it's put out into a purple chest and taken away. And so that's the simple high-level description of how it works. If I increase the number of steam engines we're trying to make, then the system will fairly quickly switch over to making steam engines again. And this, I was hoping, would be a good example of one of the other things it does. So there you go, you see, it's now making pipes down here automatically because those are an ingredient needed for steam engines. So this works automatically to make all the bits and pieces that need to go into this recipe, and then allows it to make that recipe. And that's done through the magic of read ingredients, which is then passed down here. So the idea is that you have a list of things you want to build, you have a supply of ingredients coming in over here, and you make the things up here. And if you need any other bits and pieces, they're made by these assemblers down here, and so you get all the things flowing through in the right order to make sure you get everything you want. Now, this is a simple concept, but it's taken me quite a lot of iterations to get it to this point. So let's have a look at how some of the circuitry works around here. The first thing on the list is looking at what we actually want to make. So the first step is this combinator here, which has a list of everything we want to make. We then take a reading out of this roboport down here, reading the logistics network contents, feeding it first through this combinator here, which will check for anything greater than, where anything is greater than 0, it will output the total of that thing. And this is just to remove any negative numbers that might be on the network through requests, because that would throw things off and make things very confusing. We then pass that into another combinator, this time an arithmetic one, that negates that. So that means we're now seeing a massive negative number of whatever's in the network. And that means we're subtracting what's in the network from the shopping list. And so any positive numbers that are left over are things that we want to make. That is then passed over to this combinator, which this is just an isolator, so you can see it's adding 0 to everything that goes in. So everything on the input and everything on the output is the same, but it means we can have other signals going onto the network here from this assembly machine without it throwing things off. And so that passes through a shopping list here. And if you look over on the input signal side, you can see that we currently want 100 bullet turrets, 50 laser turrets, and 10 rocket engines. All of the other things are negative numbers, and that means we don't need those. So that is then passed over into this machine here, and is picked up by the set recipe command, and so it sets the recipe to making, well in this case thrusters, because that's the first thing. Oh, and then it's finished doing that, so it empties all of the inventory out, and now it's trying to make gun turrets, so it'll start trying to make those. And that works really nicely. It's able to make things like that, and for simple recipes, like the crusher that it was doing earlier, you can see all of the ingredients for this one are things that come in on the belts from the bottom, and so that means it just works. It doesn't need to do anything clever at all with this one. However, some recipes, like the gun turrets that it's doing at the moment, are a little bit more complicated. These require iron gears, and we're not bringing iron gears in on the input supply over here, so that means they need to be made, and so we need to work out a way of doing that. And so this assembler here is also reading the ingredients required for the recipe. Those come out, well, technically they come out on the red cable as well, but that red cable only goes into the output of this combinator, so that doesn't do anything. We also feed it out on this green cable, and it's important to have those two separate, because otherwise you get the requests that are coming in from the shopping list over here. They come into the machine, and then they go out on this cable, and everything would go a bit wrong. So coming out here, you can see we've got on the green cable, we've got the ingredients that go into that recipe. These are then isolated once again and passed through here, so we don't get anything being fed backwards into this machine and then unfortunately trying to get it to make other things. And then they go to this constant combinator here, which has massive negative numbers of all of the things that are coming in from off the bus to make sure that we never try and make any of those. We also have the contents of the wagon being brought in from the station over here. It's being negated as usual and then being passed down here. So anything that's already been made and put into this wagon and just hasn't been gobbled up by one of these machines yet will be subtracted from that list as well. That request is then sent down this green cable down to here, and so this machine will then try and make anything that is required for this recipe. So with this, as you can see, it's working very nicely. It's making the gears down here. They're being put into the wagon here, and then they can be passed up into this machine up here to make the turrets. Those turrets are then unloaded from here, put into this thing. And then we've got the contents of the wagon being passed down to here. And then we've got a list here of all the things that come in on the bus. And additionally, I've then had to put in a list of all of the things that might be required as intermediate. So, for example, we've got the cogs there. We've got iron sticks. We've got cables. And pipes and so on. So we've got all of those things being subtracted from the signals being read out of the train. And then fed down to this inserter, which ensures that anything that's made that we want to keep will then be put out into the purple chest and taken away to be put into bulk storage. Over here on the other side, we've got exactly the same sort of system, so it's doubled. We've got it running twice as quickly as it would if we only had one of them, but other than that, it's exactly the same. And this works quite nicely. It's able to, as you can see, it's able to produce all of these bits and pieces, and they get unloaded over here and passed over. There are a couple of problems with this system, though. The first one, let's produce the most egregious version of it that I've found so far, is the assembly machines, because these are what we call telescopic recipes. And so that means, in order to make an assembly machine 3, you need to make an assembly machine 2. In order to make an assembly machine 2, you need to make an assembly machine 1. And in order to make an assembly machine, you need to make iron gears. And so that means, if we tell the Abomination to try and make an assembly machine 3, it's going to pass those requests it's got down onto the assembly machine underneath it. And that means the assembly machine underneath is going to try and make the speed modules, which is going to be fine because those are just red and green circuits. But it's also going to try and make the assembly machine 2s. But to make an assembly machine 2, you require assembly machine 1s and iron gears. And there's no next machine down in the tier to make those things for it, so it's just going to fail. In fact, I can demonstrate this. If we come over to the shopping list here, I can say I would like to have some assembly machine 3s, and we'll try and ask for 10 of them. I'll put that in there, and there we go. It's emptying the laser stuff out now because the assembly machine is higher in the list. It's a higher priority, and there we go. We're trying to make an assembly machine 3, which means we're trying to make an assembly machine 2. But we don't have any assembly machine 1s to fit into it. Luckily, we happen to have some gears left over from a previous build already, so those have been put in here. So we've got some of those, but we're not going to make the assembly machine 1. And even if we did have some assembly machine 1s, we'd eventually run out of the gears because they're not being requested. The speed modules would eventually be requested, but since assembly machine 2s appear before speed modules in the list, if you look on here, you can see assembly machine 2s are here, and then you carry on down the list and you find speed module 1s down here. Because the assembly machine 2 comes first, it's trying to make those first, and as you can see, it's just straight up not working. So let's take that back out of the request because it isn't going to work, and we'll let it get back onto making lasers. So there is a way to get round this, and I've made an alternative version of the Abomination, which is just over here. And this is very, very similar. So you can see at the moment it's trying to make a centrifuge, which is fine. A centrifuge requires steel, red circuits and concrete, all of which come in up the belt, and iron gears, which can be made by this machine. This is exactly the same as the other one. However, this one is now linked over to here and to here in the same way. So if I now come to here and I say, actually, I would like you to make me those assembly machine 3s, I can put those in there. It'll empty itself out. Fine. La da da da. And after a moment, there we go. So now it's trying to make assembly machine 3s. So this one's trying to make assembly machine 2s. This one's trying to make assembly machine 1s. And this one's trying to make cogs. At least until we have enough of those bits and pieces. And this has a chance of working. I don't know whether it actually will. I think, no, in this particular case, because all of the different tiers require cogs, it's getting stuck in a rather silly position where it tries to make the cogs, so we then have enough cogs for this one, so it stops trying, so it then tries to make... I'm not sure exactly what's going on here. I know approximately what's going on. So this is making cogs because this requires cogs. Then when it's made enough cogs for this one, it passes the cogs over into there. It may or may not work. And then we end up passing, but this one also requires cogs. And so because of that, the whole thing grinds to a bit of a confusion. So this isn't working quite as well as it should, which is a little bit unfortunate, and I should have tested this better before I started trying to make a video about it. But that goes to show you the problems that can occur with this sort of thing. A better example might be if I remove those and say I want to make heating towers instead. Heating towers are a much better example because they also require multiple things that require multiple tiers for production. So here you can see we're making a heating tower. That requires concrete, which we're bringing in, that's fine. It also requires heat pipes, which is made of copper and steel, so those can be made. And it requires boilers to be made. Boilers require stone furnaces. So at the moment it's running away quite happily, but then it goes, it's kind of finished. There it goes, trying to make another one. Actually, the boiler requires a stone furnace. It keeps appearing and disappearing because they build so quickly. But so sometimes over here, this one will build because the boiler requires pipes and stone furnaces, neither of which are being brought in. So sometimes this machine will flicker over to making those. There we go, like that, and will produce the bits and pieces that are required in order to make the furnaces in order to make the heating towers. So in this case, sometimes over here, this machine will end up making the pipes and the stone furnaces in order to make the boilers, and that will allow us to make the heating towers. But the whole thing gets passed around a little bit too quickly for me to really point it out as it happens. But that is an example of a telescopic recipe that does work. The assembly machines were a little bit unfortunate because two of them required the cogs, and therefore that made the whole thing jam up a little bit. The second problem with this system is related to the amount of space in the cargo wagon here. So eventually, if you're not careful, this can fill up. Now, I did have a problem previously where I was setting this inserter based on the suggestions that were coming out of the shopping list, and so that tended to mean that we'd end up with one of whatever the Abomination built left in the wagon here, and that very quickly caused it to fill up, and I was having to get the bots to empty it quite frequently. However, with this additional system up here where we're running off the contents of the wagon and just removing the things that we want to keep in there, it works a lot better, and I'm much happier with that. It does, however, still cause some problems if you start trying to make something that requires a large amount of stuff. The worst one of these is the nuclear reactor. As you can see, this requires 2,000 items in order to build a single nuclear reactor. And also, when you tell a machine to make something, you end up with more than just the ingredients required to make a single item. It will put in 2 or 3 or whatever, depending on the amount of time it takes for that build to actually work. And so that means when you then change the recipe, there's an enormous amount of stuff that needs to be unloaded from these machines because it's not needed anymore. And all of that ends up having to go back into this wagon, and that will almost certainly cause it to overflow. So for example, for the nuclear reactor, we needed 500 copper, so that's at least 5 stacks, probably going to be 10 because it'll have had enough in there to make 2 of them. And the same with the concrete, there's going to be another 10 stacks of that. And the same with the steel, probably another 10 stacks of that. And I've forgotten what the other thing was, but probably another 10 stacks of that as well. And so you end up with enormous amounts of stuff trying to unload into the wagon, and it just overflows. So you can't build, at least with my current design, you can't build things that require enormous quantities of stuff. I think the worst one that I'm actually building in here is probably the centrifuge, and you can see those are only 100 of each, and that's still pretty bad. When it finishes making something, there's a lot of stuff to unload. Another slight problem is that whenever the recipe changes, the inserters have to unload everything from the machine back into the wagon before they can change the recipe and then load it back up again. And that, it's not a problem because it does tend to work, but it does slow it down a bit. So if it's jumping around between recipes a lot, it can make the whole system run a bit slowly. And also, there's only 2 assembly machines actually building stuff, so if you need a large number of a machine, it's not going to work particularly well because it's going to take a very, very long time to make it. However, if you've got it just running off your bus and it's building up your general buildings you need to expand your base on, in this case Norvis, then it's actually kind of okay. Because by the time you need a load more of those chemical plants or whatever's being built, it's had a chance to build them all up again. And if it hasn't, then it just means you didn't set your shopping list numbers to be big enough back when you were putting it all together in the first place. Another thing I needed to make sure I had was this was originally a red chest. I had to turn it into a purple chest because it filled up. I also had various other complicated things on it, like checking the ingredients that were coming out of one of these machines and then multiplying it by 4 to make sure there was always enough in the cargo wagon. That turned out to be actually unnecessary, but it was a thing that was worth considering, and you know, I refined this a little bit over time, and it's got slightly better to the point where it's now more or less trustworthy, at least most of the time. I can't say I'd actually recommend it because it has broken a lot of times, and even in its current state, it's not perfect, but it does mostly work. And that's probably the best thing I can say about it. It's not completely awful. It was a fun challenge to build it and to mess around with it over quite a long period of time as well, though. So I don't regret making it, and I don't regret letting it run in my factory. Where over here in the real factory, it is basically working. We've got it ticking over nicely and trying to produce the various bits and pieces that the factory needs, which apparently is laser turrets at the moment. Fine, so that suggests it's fairly close to the end of the shopping list at this point. This one also has in an additional thing here for building the stone furnaces, which was to, in theory, allow it to potentially sometimes, maybe, make some of those heating towers. It's not great. I think that's better done elsewhere, or perhaps on the larger version of it. But down here, you can see how I've plumbed it into my normal bus setup, and all of the ingredients are being passed through. And it basically works. I'm reasonably happy with it. So, I hope that's been an interesting insight into some of the diseased things my brain dredges up. I think I've gone through and explained the hows and the whys and the ways that it works reasonably well. But if you have any questions, drop them in the comments or on the Discord, and I'll see if I can answer them. I'm not going to promise I can. It's quite possible it just works through magic and dreams. But you know what? I'll do my best. Thanks for watching. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can see my next horrendous design of goodness knows what. And also come along to the Discord, follow the streams, and so on. I'll be back with another video next Friday, and streams every Monday and Wednesday. I'll see you then. Bye bye.